Hello everyone, this is Manohar Reddy, Department of Cybersecurity, Institute of Aeronautical Engineering. Today I am going to explain you the concept of ICMP router discovery messages. ICMP router discovery messages. So ICMP router discovery messages. We already have a discussion with the ICMP messages. There are two types of messages. One is ICMP error reporting or correction messages, and another one is ICMP query messages. So, to inform that all the messages, the ICMP has to use informational messages. So here, the router discovery messages are the messages which are used to find the router whether it is alive or not. So in a computer networking, the ICMP Internet Route Discovery, so IRDP is the Internet Router Discovery Protocol. Internet Router Discovery Protocol is also called as the Internet Router Discovery Protocol, which designs for the computer hosts to discover the presence and location of the router on their IPv4 local area network. So on the network, the routers are located. On the network, the routers are located. So it discovers the presence and location of the router. It discovers the presence and location of the router. So whether it is the router is available or not, whether router is alive or not, all these types of informations, these types of messages have been informed in the form of ICMP informational messages. ICMP informational messages. So these router discovery messages are also informational messages that gives the details about the router on the particular networks. Router on the particular network. Whether this computer host discovers the router is presented or not, or whether it is located on the IPv4 local area network. So here the IRDP, that is nothing but Internet Router Discovery Protocol. Internet Router Discovery Protocol is defined by the IETF, is the Internet Engineering Task Force Standard. Internet Engineering Task Force, which is defined by the standard of requests for comments 1256 standard. So with this Internet Control Message Protocol, which is based on defined as RFC 792. So request for comments of 792, and which eliminates the need to manually configure routing information. So each and every router has alive or not, and each and every router presented or not, and routing information, and which packets are arrived to the router, and which packets are going through the routers. All these types of information has to be maintained by this ICMP protocol. All this information has to be maintained by this ICMP protocol. And here IRDP, Internet Route Discovery Protocol, helps to the router is presented or not on the network. So to enable router discovery, the IRDP defines two kinds of ICMP messages. The ICMP router solicitation message is sent from, that is nothing but it is a request message, a request type of message is sent from a computer host to any routers on the local area network to request that they advertise their presence on the network. That means the routers has to advertise themselves. On the network. They are provided services to the data transmission. So every router, the routers which are connected on the local area network, has to advertise themselves. They are presented on the network. advertise themselves, they are presented on the network. So that is what the router sent request message from this computer host to any other routers. For what purpose? The router has to advertise themselves. The router has to advertise themselves. They are presenting on the network. They are presenting on the network. And here the ICMP router advertisement message. The router advertisement message is sent by the router on the local area network to announce its IP address is available for routing. The IP address is available for routing. One is what? One is the message from host to router. That is nothing but a solicitation message. And another one is what? Router to host message. Router to host. So first one is what? Solicitation message, which is nothing but a request message for advertising the router itself. And the second one is a router to host message. That is router advertisement message, which is provided in the form of IP address, so that the router and the hosts are communicated together. So that the router and hosts are communicated together by providing these two types of message. One is what? ICMP router solicitation message, and the second one is what? ICMP router advertisement message. By providing these two, the host can understand that the router is alive and the router address. And similarly, the router advertisement message involved that to communicate with the ICMP system, ecosystems. When a host boosts up, it sends a solicitation message to IP multicast addresses 224.0.0.2. It is one multicast address. And in response, one or more routers may send their advertisement message. Suppose the host is one, and here the destination is 1. In between them, router 1 is presented, router 2 is presented, router 3 is presented to the destination side. All these routers has to advertise themselves. And all these routers has to advertise themselves to give the information to this host. So if there is more than one router, the host usually picks the first message. The host usually takes the first message. It gets and adds that router into routing table. The host itself creating a routing table. The host itself it is creating routing table for all the routers. So router 1 having one IP address, router 2 having one IP address. Like that, it maintains all the router information in the routing table. So independently of solicitation, a router may periodically send out advertisement messages. Once the data is transmitted, along with that data transmission, the router advertisement message also has to send. Because sending that message, the data transmission of the router, the data transmission across the network has to be passed through the routers. And here we can understand that router discovery of the target. So here this is one type of router, this is one type of router, this is one type of router, this is one type of routers. So all these routers are connected with one switch. Suppose a host can send, this is a host, and host can send a data transmission to the destination side. This is one host. If the data wants to send from host A to host B, the data has to be sent through this across router 1, router 2, router 3 and router 4 to the destination side. Router 1, router 2, router 3, router 4 to the destination side B, destination system B. So at this moment, a host sends a solicitation message. That is nothing but a requesting message, solicitation message or requesting message sent to the router itself. So each and every routers has to take that all the solicitation messages, and all the routers has to give the response. Routers has to give the response to this host. So each and every router has to advertise themselves. So router 1 has to advertise about itself, router 2 has to advertise about itself, router 3 has to advertise itself, router 4 also has to advertise itself. What they are going to advertise, they are all connected with the help of this switch, and I am the router 1, and which contains the 192.168.34.0, and I am the router 2 having this IP address, I am the router 3 having this IP address, and the router 4 having certain IP address. So all this information has to be maintained in the host system with the help of routing table, which maintains router names with the help of router names and IP addresses. Along with these IP addresses, maintains the destination addresses, source addresses also. Source addresses, router type, router 1 or router 2, along with that router destination IP address. All this information has to be maintained in the routing table. So this is the way of finding the discovery of the router across the network. And ICMP route redirect messages. So these redirect messages are used by routers to notify that hosts on the data link that a better route is available for a particular destination. So the routers has to notify that better route for the data transmission to the destination side. So they are notifying itself, they are advertising their information, but along with that the routers has to notify that the hosts on the data link that a better route is available. Which route is better for data transmission from the source to destination? Which route is better from the source to destination? So for example, the two routers R1 and R2, those two are the two routers, are connected to the same Ethernet segment as host H. The default gateway for host H is configured to use router R1. So now host H sends packet to router R1 to reach the destination on remote branch of his particular so and so IP address. So now router R1, after it consults the routing table, finds that the next hop to reach host 10.1.1.1 is router 2. So to reach this destination, router 1 has to visit router 2 also. And router 1 must forward the packet out the same Ethernet interface on which it was received. So router R1 forwards the packet to the router R2 and also sends an ICMP redirect message to the host H. This informs that the host is the best route to reach 10.1.1.1 is by way of router R2. So host H then forwards all the subsequent packets destined for the 10.1.1.1 to router R2. So here the source address is this one A and destination address this one B. So this data has to be transmitted across the R1, R2, R3, R4. If which route is available for the best route, which route is available for the transmission for the best way. So here the data has to be transmitted across A to R1, then next to R3, then next to R4, then next to B. Or also you can say that R1 to R2, R2 to R4, R4 to B. So here we can see in the diagram itself, the host H1 is the main office host and remote branch office host 10.1.1. So now the host H wants to communicate to the remote branch office host and wants to send the information to the remote host. So now at this moment, which router is best one to reach the destination? So this moment the R1 having a certain distance, R2 having certain distance, and if R3 is there, R4 is there also, it having certain distance. So choose the best router to forwarding the packets to the remote branch office host. That is nothing but destination host. So choosing the best router to forward the data transmission to the destination site is nothing but the router discovery of router redirect messages to the host. Router redirect messages to the host. So here the router R1 having certain amount of time and R2 also having certain amount of time. Through which router the data has to be forwarded fastly to the remote branch office. So this is the way we can understand that router discovery process. When are ICMP redirects sent actually? When are the ICMP redirects are sent? So Cisco routers send ICMP redirects when all of these conditions are met. Cisco routers are the main branch routers which are developed and designed actually. Those routers sends ICMP redirects when all of these conditions are met. What are those conditions actually? The interface on which the packet comes into the router is the same interface on which the packet gets routed out. So the interface on which the packet comes into the router is the same interface on which the packet gets routed out. So it comes the which packet comes to the router is having the interface is same to the interface of the which packets gets outed. So as well as the subnet or network of the source address is on the same subnet or network of the next hop, that IP address having the routed packet. As well as the datagram is not a source routed. The datagram is also not source routed. And the kernel is configured to send redirects mechanism. The kernel is also has to configure to send redirect messages. By default, Cisco router send ICMP redirect. If you use Cisco routers, if any routers get failed, then automatically send ICMP redirect messages. The interface subcommand no IP redirects can be used to disable ICMP redirects. And inverse mapping. So among this all, the inverse mapping is one type of scanning method. It is also one type of scanning method that gathers information about inactive IP addresses. On network to determine which IP addresses are associated with active hosts. So inverse mapping is a stealth approach. That is nothing but opposite approach of the network scanning method. It gathers information about inactive IP addresses on a network. It gets the information about inactive IP addresses on the network to determine which IP addresses are associated with active hosts. And it is also a technique for check out internal networks or hosts of a targeted system, which are generally protected by the filtering device like firewall. So here the inverse mapping attacks is also illustrated below. So here in what way the attackers can use this inverse mapping technique to find that inactive IP addresses or to find the IP addresses are associated with active hosts. So here attacker sends an ICMP reply message to the range of IP addresses presumably behind a filtering device. So he sends an reply messages actually. Upon receiving the series of ICMP reply messages, since the filtering device does not keep state of the list of ICMP requests, it will allow these packets to their destination. Allows all the packets to their destination. If there is an internal router, the router will respond with an ICMP. Host unreachable. If any router is not available, then the router will respond with this ICMP message, host unreachable. For every host that it cannot reach, thus giving the attacker knowledge of all hosts which are present behind the filtering device. So by doing this all the attacks, by doing this all the messages, the inverse mapping is having a certain issue. So this method exposes internal routers as well as. So here the internet and border router and the internal network, and these are all the different types of internal networks. So here ICMP echo reply datagrams to the different IPs which suspect or in the IP range of the network we are probing. IP range of network we are probing. So we can use all ICMP query request and reply with this method. ICMP request and reply with this method. So here from this we can say that it is a technique used to map internal networks such as internal networks, local area network, or man or wired area networks. So LAN, MAN, WAN, whatever it may be, the internal networks. So used to map internal networks or hosts that are protected by a filtering device like firewalls. So usually some of the systems are not reachable from the internet. Some of the systems may not be reachable from the internet, that is network unreachable, destination unreachable, network try not found, like that some types of messages are happening. So for that we use routers which will give the away internal architecture information of a network, even if the question they were asked does not make any sense. So for this scanning type, so for this we compile a list of IP addresses that list what is not there and use it to conclude where things probably are, So by doing this we can say that all the systems are having that IP addresses are inactive or not, whether using that protection firewalls or not, they will say. So this is one type of scanning technique with the help of ICMP echo reply datagrams. ICMP echo reply datagrams. So this is the way of understanding the inverse mapping. So once again, we revise the topics which we discussed in this session. So what are the things we discussed in this session actually? So first one is what ICMP router discovery messages. So what is the router discovery messages and what is the protocol will help you to give that all the messages. Here IRDP is one certain protocol, Internet Router Discovery Protocol, displays all the messages about the routers inactive or alive. And to enable router, IRDP defines two kinds of messages. One is ICMP router solicitation message and ICMP router advertisement messages. And here we can say that we can see all the hosts are communicated with these routers by sending their messages like a solicitation message as well as router advertisement messages. So by doing this, a router discovery of the target is going to be taken by the systems. And route redirect message. So here all the routers has to notify that the best route across the network to the data transmission has to be informed to the hosts. So that is the way we can understand this ICMP route discovery messages. And ICMP redirects sent. ICMP redirect sent. So Cisco routers send some ICMP redirects that are based on the conditions of the type of interface, that they are using, and type of network they are using, So based on the network of the type and based on the interface of the type, the redirects will be sent to the destination side. And inverse mapping. So inverse mapping is one type of stealth approach network scanning method that gathers information about inactive IP addresses on a network to determine which IP addresses are associated with active hosts. And we can say that it is one type of technique for checking out all the internet networks or hosts of target system which are generally protected by filtering device like firewall. So which systems are going to be protected by the firewall they are using. So based on some certain conditions, the inverse mapping attacks will be illustrated here. And in this figure also we can say that the inverse mapping is a technique used to map internal networks or hosts that are protected by filtering device like firewalls. firewalls. Other than this firewall, we can use different types of security softwares also. Other than this firewalls, we can use some certain security software also. So that is about inverse mapping of the technique. So in this ICMP route redirect messages and router discovery protocol are the very important messages, very important points that we have to remind to display the router discovery messages. Display the router discovery messages. Thank you all.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.